I see some people are just now trickling in. So good morning, everyone. And we'll give everyone about 1 or 2 more minutes before we start up. I think we're expecting a few more folks. Please make sure that you are muted. Thank you. Great. I see a lot of people jumping in. So let's get started this morning. Thank you so much for joining this session about the Society for Ecological Restoration and with a focus on our restoration wheel. I'm Terry Doss. I've been a member of SCR for I'm not sure how long, but I do remember my first SCR meeting back in, I think it was 1996 at Rutgers University, and that's where I met the illustrious and movie star Carl Alderson. But anyway, I'm going to turn this over to Matt Holthouse, who's going to describe a little bit about SCR and the restoration wheel and other aspects of it. Matt is a civil and environmental engineer with over a decade of experience in civil engineering. He is the acting president for the Society for Ecological Restoration Mid-Atlantic chapter, which covers the New York, New Jersey area south all the way through West Virginia and Virginia and DC. So if you're not a member and you're interested, please reach out to Matt or I. Matt also serves as the Global Organization's Continuing Education Committee for maintaining certification status. So if you're interested in being a CERP, a Certified Ecological Restoration Practitioner, again, please feel free to reach out to Matt or I. But for now, I'll turn it over to you, Matt. Thanks.
Thanks, Terry. So I was asked by our global representatives to present the standards and the restoration wheel aspect of it to this conference. As sort of an outline, in a local CERP, registered CERP, as Terry said, I do lead the Mid-Atlantic chapter, which covers New Jersey, New York. So I'm going to overview. I'm going to give a broad landscape of the SIR organization itself, the standards that they've generated, which are continuously being updated, and then go into the actual CERP wheel and give you a demonstration and talk about potential usage for urbanized environments. So the Society of Ecological Restoration is a nonprofit organization. It was founded in 1988, and its goals are to advance the science, practice, and policy of ecological restoration solely. They do represent the global community. They have over 400 active members in over 110 countries, and they're primarily fostering restoration knowledge exchange between practitioners and researchers, and as Terry said, providing that certification of application and being a practitioner. They do host biannual conferences every 2 years. The next one is in 2023 in Australia. They are also planning a North American conference, which they're not advertising yet, but that will be happening in 2024, at least targeted 2024, to occur out, I believe, in Seattle. It's going to be on the West Coast, and a joint conference with Canada chapters. The standards. One of SIR's most significant actions have been development and release of the global standards. They came out the first edition in 2016. The second edition is the current application. It was released in 2019. It was developed by over 16 authors from 5 different continents. The key principles were developed in basically a guide to practitioners in developing high quality and in ecosystem-based restoration. And then it's currently the most downloaded publication from the journal Restoration Ecology, with over 50,000 downloads since 2019. I do have a link to the standards. I will also show you the website here at the end of the presentation. But it was basically outlined to present a robust framework to guide restoration practice toward achieving intended goals, addressing challenges, effective design implementation, complex dynamics, addressing negative trade-offs associated with land management priorities. And it goes through 8 categories, one being the initial engagement of stakeholders, which is a large aspect of accomplishing any ecosystem restoration project, is implementing or engaging those stakeholders who are local, drawing on many types of knowledge. So again, stakeholders provide a great source of knowledge, especially on the regional complex or local complex, getting your local, your local representatives at the state or even local restoration organizations, etc. It's informed by native reference ecosystems. They want you to identify local, regional functioning reference ecosystems to be used. It supports the ecosystem restoration recovery process, essentially trying to, which gets into the next few sections, essentially trying to make sure that the recovery, the trajectory of the restoration project is set for long term. So you may do one small step at the initial recovery, but the intent is that that will develop over time to be a functioning ecosystem. It will set clear goals and objectives for any restoration project and seeks the highest level of recovery possible, which is what we're going to get into in discussion, and usage of the application or recovery wheel is on item 6. And then it's a continuum, a part of a continuum restoration restorative activities, meaning that you could implement long-term management goals, sequencing of activities for your restoration projects, and also gains cumulative value with that. So as I said, this is for training on the recovery wheel, which is under item 6 of the standards for highest level recovery. They've developed this on a 5-star system and used this wheel. The wheel is adaptable. They have this as a standard development with general guidance on how to implement it. But the intent is that as a practitioner or as somebody doing the work and leading the restoration or doing the monitoring, that they can adapt it based on the ecological restoration aspect that they're doing. So depending on type of eco restoration project, whether it's coastal, freshwater, and urban environments, which I'll talk about a few applications that we thought about for the reference project I'm going to demonstrate show today. Freshwater wetlands, upland habitat, etc. It could be it's intended to be based on your actual ecosystem restoration. The 5-star system refers to the recovery scale. It can be used to assess and measure progress along a trajectory of recovery towards a reference state for several broad ecosystem attributes. And again, those attributes are intended to be adjustable or modified. The table seen on the right of the slide shows the 1 to 5-star scale for 3 of these ecosystem attributes. Within the standards document, this table is extended and includes 3 additional attributes. You see the 6 attributes that they have as the standard listed here on the left. In the table, each row corresponds to a certain ecosystem attribute, whereas each column corresponds to a star rating. In each cell of the table, rating criteria are provided to help practitioners determine what star rating they should assign to each attribute. Based on relevant monitoring data for the projects, practitioners can assign a star rating to each attribute. Star ratings for a given restoration site should always be determined by comparing to and contrasting with the reference site, ecosystem, and/or model. The table covers 6 ecosystem attributes. However, the standards provide a generalized version of the rating table that practitioners can use to rate their ecosystem attributes not provided in this table, making a 5-star system adaptable to unique projects and contexts. As part of the 5-star system, you have the recovery wheel, and CER does provide multiple usages of this wheel. They have a downloadable Excel version, they have an online version, and they have a PDF format. This wheel can be used in tandem with the 5-star system, and it is. The basic stock version of the wheel provided in the standards is divided into those 6 major slices, representing each of the attributes that they've predefined. You can modify these. Within each major ecosystem attribute, there's an additional slices. These smaller slices correspond to more specific attributes and indicators, referred into the standards as a sub-attribute. For example, in the stock version of the wheel, the absence of threats attribute can also cover the contamination or invasive species or overutilization sub-attributes nested underneath it. So the intent is that you can modify these larger attributes based on your restoration project as well as the sub-attributes. And it's intended to be used at the baseline to kind of plan and project on the highest level of recovery that you can achieve, and then use it in monitoring events post-construction to identify the trajectory that the system is headed towards following the work. Also in the wheel are rings, each of which are corresponding to the star rating system. So going through that star rating system and the generalization of it, the practitioners would assign a star based on each attribute and then come back and shade it. Using the online tool or the Excel version, it'll do it automatically for you. So using the ecological recovery wheel together with the 5-star system to assess, visualize, and communicate restoration progress at your restoration site is very simple. You get a blank copy of the wheel, you define your ecosystem attribute based on your project and your sub attributes, and then you simply go through and assign the stars to each category. It is best to use this with stakeholders, and I will give a disclaimer that the project I'm going to give for reference, I did not do with stakeholders. I did it for this presentation, and the wheel and the first edition of the standards came in after we did the design work for it on the baseline. So it's a post application just to see the aspect of showing the difference between the baseline and what's happened post monitoring or post construction. Excuse me. But again, it's up to each practitioner to determine the metrics based on what you are trying to achieve, assess, and monitor. For example, the sub-attribute contamination, you'll likely access this presence of a variety of contaminants at your site to inform a larger picture of site contamination and assign an overall stars rating. Urbanized environments, there's likely a lot of contamination, either through dumping, chemical leach from roadways or other items that have been historically filled in these urbanized environments through progress and development, or just general tracking of pedestrians. And again, I'll get into a couple of these potential attributes to monitor at the end of the presentation for urbanized environments. So here you can just see a reference of the standards version before I get into a specific case study. And it's a side-by-side comparison. It shows baseline conditions of what occurred, and then over extended period of time, ideally you would fill this in annually. The projection and projection, and what's occurred in that restoration project. So my case study that I'm going to show, we've been presenting it from the WSP side quite a bit lately because we've gotten through a few years of monitoring with it and shown great progress. It's the Sawmill Creek. It's the New York City EDC Sawmill Creek Wetlands Mitigation Bank. It is in Staten Island. It's part of the Hudson Estuary. It's New York's first mitigation bank, New York City's first mitigation bank. It restored degraded tidal wetlands to generate mitigation credits, and serves the 5 boroughs of New York City in offering mitigation credits for development. Phase 1 of the project is done. That's what I'm going to present on. Phase 2 has a preliminary design that was completed. We're currently working on getting that out on the market. Phase 3 is in the process of beginning the design work. So it's an expanded banking system. Here you can see side by side, and I'll have a lot of photos for you on this one. Side by side comparison. This is in an industrial area. So again, urbanized type setting, a lot of historical dumping. The primary, there was largely for this site a lot of contamination, either through physical in that garbage and dumping or chemical. Some we had old transformers that leaked PCBs. There were soils that were identified with high contamination of lead. There's also extensive invasive Phragmites in the area. Soils were slightly higher than the general tidal inundation to fight Phragmites off, so it was a dominant stand of frag in a lot of the areas we were trying to restore. But then there was within the site a lot of good native species. Part of the banking area was just general preservation. So the overall goal was to restore these urbanized areas into the pre-development, pre-destroyed marsh plain to provide better fish and wildlife habitat and the increased opportunities for research and passive recreation. So here you can see we did use a reference site nearby. We also used some of the wetlands within the interior of the phase one. So the red boundary is the phase one limits. The blue area to the northwest of the work is the reference area. So this is how we're mimicking our restoration approach, and also how we were comparing to the post-construction restoration wheel and its application and overall meeting the same functions as what the reference site was. So as I said, it was decades of filling garbage, debris, contamination along these wetlands. It had been worsened by Superstorm Sandy. The wetlands were lacking biodiversity. So as part of that, we came in, constructed variable habitat ranges, including forested enhancements, upland enhancements, the actual tidal wetlands enhancements, creation, rehabilitation, removal of garbage, etc. We had over 900 cubic yards of debris removed, multiple containers of just tires, and you can see some of these in the photo now. Steel chassis was removed, multiple transformers that were leaking PCBs. Excuse me, up to 10 feet of fill in some areas. Some of the locations here in this industrial complex were just remnant car disposal areas where it was a junkyard, and that's the reason why for so many containers of tires. Again, as I said, there were chemical contamination in different areas, largely on the location of the transformers that were dumped. There were other areas across the site that had high contamination of lead, so we did remediation of those areas. Constructed tidal marshes in these upland areas that were removed and replanted with native species. So this is a pre-construction photo compared to a post-construction photo, and latest in June of this year. We started construction in 2018. This is just the larger area of the restoration project. There were three major areas that we did do actual manipulation to reconstruct the marsh. This was the biggest area here. That you can see the constructed channels. There were upland enhancements around it in this forested area. And then make sure, I'm hoping you all can see my cursor if I move it to the correct screen. So this area was the largest area of restoration with upland enhancements through here on Chelsea Road. I think that's actually Edward Curry in this forested area. And then here's the remnant junkyard for dumped trash and vehicles. You can see as a nice side-by-side comparison, the first implementation of this phase one, EDC did not get the property of where this trailer was remnant, so this did stay on site, but it provides a good reference point because you can see it in the multiple photos. It's actually over here a little bit. But just the sheer amount of garbage that was removed and revegetated. So area one, largest area two, one of the smaller areas, but here was where we had most of the dumping and fill taken out, tires, the transformers, etc. And then area three is on the south, which was a smaller area. Again, lots of photos for you to see here for the progress of the site. Pre-construction, a lot of garbage, the process of removing that fill and the materials, immediately post-construction, completed in 2019. So this was the shrub area of that garbage removal near that trailer. And then in 2021, nice post-construction photo of the planted native species thriving in this area. We've been doing a lot of post-construction monitoring as part of the IT process requirements, largely for the chemical comparison. With being in this urbanized environment, they wanted to make sure, the IRT wanted to make sure that we weren't, exposing the benthic and other habitats to additional chemical leachate. So we've been doing spider sampling, we've been doing benthic surveys, avian species surveys. We just completed year 3 of monitoring, which is what the post-construction baseline is on for the recovery wheel, and I'll show here in a few minutes. And then, and again, another nice expansive photo of the constructed tidal marsh. And then again, this is the west area. Current conditions at low tide. This channel was intended to drain, provide mudflats at points in time. You have a transitional between low marsh, high marsh into a tidal scrub area. We did include fencing along the entire project perimeter to prevent dumping. This is a major off the area industrial complex. There's a lot of historical dumping here, illegal dumping for that matter. So the fence was installed to reduce that and ultimately try to stop it. And it's been quite successful thus far. And then here, another photo of the same area, just at high tide, show the variability. And one last photo of the area. This is the big area 1 restoration facing west at low tide, just nice sunset. This is kind of like a picture perfect, what everyone hopes to see in a completed project. So baseline conditions for the recovery wheel. Again, disclaimer, I did do this on my own. It is better to do this with stakeholders because it will not be as biased. But you can see there's quite a bit of low ratings on multiple items, especially in the physical conditions and the absence of threats. Again, large amount of physical dumping, chemical contamination, areas of what was restored not meeting the tidal regime, hydrology exchange, needed support wetland habitats, thus the invasive species dominance in those areas, overutilization, i.e. that historic dumping. There were multiple people coming in and just throwing things everywhere, destroying the habitat, large source of chemical contamination, I've already said. I did give some higher ratings to the ecosystem function and structural diversity, again, because this is for just the phase 1 area. It's not solely specific to the few areas that we did the major earthwork to remove the invasive species or remove the physical dumping and remediate the soils. There was a nice healthy marsh area that was part of preservation. So there was that exchange. There was source native material to help with that exchange. So there was this good spatial mosaic and strata and trophic levels observed in abundance on site, because there was that part of a good healthy ecosystem there, and a positive link between those habitats. There was just a lot of outside degradation coming in around the perimeter that we were looking to eliminate. And then now post-monitoring, 2022 conditions. As you see, again, a little biased because we were the ones that restored it, and we did not have and I just did this, and stakeholders were not involved. So some may knock me down a couple levels, but ultimately post construction in year 3 now, contaminations have been eliminated. The physical degradation has been prevented with the fencing. There's been an increase in diversity of bird species. There were 11 new species monitored over this last year. Invasive species is down below the 10% requirement for the mitigation banking. It's actually at 2% overall for the site in this phase 1. So it's very much thriving. And this ultimately just shows you this nice side-by-side comparison. Again, using this with stakeholders to show that, hey, we've done this project, or we're planning for this project, and this is now thriving. So it's a success story to highlight and help politicians. Great to show to politicians, and showing to public to say, hey, this is where your money went. This is actually something good. So as I said way earlier in the beginning, this one was developed for an urbanized area, again, industrial complex. So some of the things that I was considering as I was filling this out, and what maybe used in other urbanized ecosystem restoration, and using this recovery wheel with some of the categories and attributes. The general attributes, as I was thinking for the wheel, kind of fit in line with what was needed. It's more of the subcategories that may be modified. The external exchanges is a big one, especially, again, in urbanized environments with debris and garbage control or human interactions. I've spoken to others where, they do some sort of restoration project and they get people just trampling through the system, and it never picks up because there's a lot of public activity there, and it's just affecting the habitat. Or you have garbage just flying in because there's no control, or chemicals from adjacent roadways, etc. So how can you plan to prevent that interaction so that the ecosystem thrives? Physical conditions, the hydrologic hydraulic conditions to support the diversity of habitats, not being isolated to one specific habitat. You want to maximize your recovery, so not constructing to just one habitat type, but a plethora of type, so that the system overall will cycle through and support variable ranges of the ecosystem food chain. And then overall resilience. The topic of today and going forward is climate resiliency. So how do the restoration projects look long term with that resiliency aspect? Do the vegetation you plant and the native habitats you create have the ability to migrate and adapt to those changing conditions that we aren't quite sure what will happen yet? We have high scales where it's saying everything will be flooded. We have low scales where it may not be that significant. And there's still a lack on this coastal side, a lack of understanding and potential accretion to combat climate change and rising sea levels. So taking those in considerations, different temperature conditions, constructing habitats, again, with a diversity of native species that have the ability to migrate or withstand variable conditions will be supportive. Don't plant species that are already showing signs of loss and suffering under current conditions. I know there's a few tree species recently within the region that south it's been worse, and it's working its way northeast, in which they're just not surviving anymore. They're having bugs come in and start to destroy those habitats. Where it's being projected that they won't be around in another 10 years, 15 or 10, 20 years because of that, overall change in the ecosystem with climate change. So I'll leave it at that. I do want to show, we get out of this presentation, I do want to show the standards site. We can post this webpage. It's very simple though, SIR.org. They have a link to it for the global policy to get to the SIR standards, which is what I have open right now. You can download the long version and the short version. But if you scroll down, it's where I primarily want to show you right now is this recovery wheel. They do have the PDF version, which is the wheel and the 5-star system. For the 6 baseline attributes that they have on the standard. You have the interactive version online, which is on this next tab. So you can enter your site name, etc., fill in your attributes. They do not allow you to modify the attributes here, but that's not to say you can't document it somewhere else. And then the Excel version that you can download, which you can modify. So with that, I will say I am done, and we can open up to questions. And
thanks, Matt. We did have a question about was there any consideration for including social factors in the wheel? For example, local community connection to the restoration site.
So not in the recovery wheel, but the standards have a separate system for social interactions. Let me put the presentation back up. So because this was focused on the recovery wheel, I didn't go into it. But I believe it's item 3 or 4. There's an actual social interaction wheel that goes into that exact question. It goes through that process of those interactions. So it's earlier in the phase as part of your planning evaluation.
Okay, and we did post a link to the standards website. A second question is a 1-star rating considered a low but good rating or a bad rating? And if the latter, then isn't it possible to rate your site with 0 stars for some aspects, such as contamination?
Yes, in my opinion, yes. I'd have to speak with the folks at Global and get a confirmation. But as you read the 5-star ratings, level 1 kind of says, well, there's something there, but it's they're vague. They're vague for a purpose. It's to give you guidance and allow you to make an adaptation to it specific to your site. In my opinion, you could easily give yourself a 0 star if it's completely contaminated as a baseline. There's nothing in the standards saying that you cannot.
Yeah, and I've actually, in using the recovery wheel, I've actually given, in the Meadowlands, I've given some sites a 0 to start with. We have another question. What do you look for in a reference site?
Similar desired complex, habitat complexes is a start. Ideally, you want to get local, you want to be regional, you want to be, ideally for the water aspect, you want to be within the same watershed. So in this area, generally Hub 14, something very close to the site. You're not going to go take a reference site that's 50 to 100 miles away, because the regional base complex could easily shift within that distance. So you want to evaluate, and usually what we do when we're looking for reference sites is we do a desktop analysis to figure out, here's our intended restoration area. Where can we visually see potential nearby, within 5-10 miles distance, a functioning wetland through Google Earth or something like that, within the same watershed as well. So it's a visual evaluation on the desktop, and then we'll do some site assessments to verify if that's a good system. So we'll probably come up with a list of 5 to 10 sites, and then narrow it down to the best ideal one for what our target habitat complex will be for the restored site. So for the case study I gave you, it was a tidal wetland system. We wanted to go through the mudflat, low marsh, high marsh, shrub, upland conditions. We had a diversity from upland all the way down to mudflat and open water. So we had that at that reference area. It was a transition from that mudflat, inland, coastal, tidal marsh, all the way through that transitional buffer that we had on our site. And it was functioning. So when we did the site evaluations, we didn't see contamination. We saw diversity of species with using the site. We may not have gone into the microinvertebrate and benthic evaluation piece of it, but we saw multiple avian species and other wildlife species or general usage of the site in a few events. So that's it comes down to large scale looking in, and then really just coming down to where do we see a healthy functioning ecosystem with diverse habitat complexes.
And building on that, when you think about our urban systems, we do have what some people classify as novel ecosystems. So the question that came up was, has there ever been an instance where there is no reference site nearby? And that has definitely come up in my work. So I'd like you to answer it, and to go further with that is, did you have to theoretically construct one from historical conditions?
Yes. Yep. We have had that occur, and we've looked at historical conditions as a baseline, but then that's where we do, in my past, we've expanded beyond very local. We've gone a little bit more widespread to identify some potential where we're seeing similar habitat complex. And when we do that, we generally monitor that site a little bit more to understand the exchange between the physical and the ecological based conditions. So how's the hydrology functioning, where the native species and vegetation we're seeing, where the fisheries or avian species that are using the site, like what is that in exchange between those on something further away. And then we're monitoring our proposed site to understand, well, how's those different categories functioning here, to try to develop that correlative relationship between the two. So we still go ultimately find some reference site just further away. It's not ideal, never ideal. And then using some historical items. But yes, it has come up where we do not find anything very local because of long-term development.
In terms of another question was, how mature does a reference site have to be in order for it to be considered a reference site, i.e. 5 years, 10 years? So I guess it's, can we, if I can rephrase the question, can we use restored sites as a reference site?
I specifically wouldn't use anything that's less than 5 years old. Just for mere fact, like it's still developing. It still we've had sites that look great after 5 years, and then in 10 years they're starting to struggle again. And it's ever growing, and that's why part of helping with SUR Global and expanding this outreach in between practitioners and researchers is understanding why that occurs, and doing that post monitoring and understanding to apply to the next project. So in any case, I wouldn't use anything that is generally less than 10 years old. I would look for something more historical. It's here in the New Jersey, New York area, it hasn't been that difficult to find something. It may not be super local, but it hasn't been terribly difficult to find something that is historically untouched, that could be still used within this more local region.
Then the next question talks about how you used it just at the 3-year mark, but can you use it further out into the future? And then they add on to that to say, how do your observations and your use of the tool change over time for long-term monitoring?
So yes, and as I said, this is ideally something that as a practitioner, and we're doing these monitoring events, we should do it annually just to show that the changes. It's a good side-by-side comparison. We, for this case study, only have 5 years of monitoring, which is what most projects are anyway, because that's what permitting stipulates in this area. So we will realistically be done after the 5 years. But ideally, everything comes down to funding. Ideally, if the funding was there, we would use this long term and continue this process. The standards demonstrated something that was 10, 20 years after construction. I think it was a baseline and a 10-year mark. We're now at a baseline and technically 7 years after. That baseline could not, there's nothing specific into baseline. It has to happen right before construction. Because it's a planning process. Baseline could be a few years before you get into constructing the habitat. And then, your habitat, the 10-year mark for the standards could have been the 5 years after construction. Did I answer all of that question? Start rambling a little bit.
So I would like to also note that you mentioned that when you're using the wheel online, that you can't manipulate it to fit your project exactly, but there have been different wheels developed for different types of practices. And in fact, there is a new publication that SCR just put out specific for mining restoration. Yep. And in the past, I think Mart Larson and folks from New York City Parks were looking at trying to create a wheel that was specific for the tidal marshes around our urban harbor. So I think it's important that people know that even though you can't change what's online, you can work to fit these more accurately to fit your projects.
And that's where the Excel version really comes nicely into play, because you can modify everything in this Excel version.
I don't see any more questions. Wait, oh, one just popped up. Has SCR recommended specific metrics for tracking project progress in each attribute?
Yeah, that comes into the 5-star rating again. And you can go to the standards and look at each one of these. Again, they are vague. Most of the part, they're more vague, but they do put in different metrics for some comparisons. And as I gotta remember I'm not presenting. Let me pull up the slide again. You can see in here for species composition, they give a 1-star rating for less than 2% of the species that were seen in the reference site, up to a 5-star where you're seeing greater than 80%, similar to what the reference site was. So they give some aspect to it, but they also allow you to have the flexibility in modifying that.
If you go online, there you can find examples for different projects that have been used around the world, and it's real interesting to see how they've built on this aspect and made it specific for different projects. It's some of the wheels are really fascinating to review. All right, I don't see any more questions, Matt. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody.
And this over to Isabel.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for helping us moderate, and thank you again, Matt, for coming in here and teaching us all about the recovery wheel. It's been really interesting. So thanks, everyone. Please join us again at our next session of the conference. It's going to be really interesting on shallow water habitat restoration. So come back and see you at 11. Thanks.